You know, people have been saying, "Oh, Petula," to me my whole life. Sometimes it was affectionate, sometimes it was amused, sometimes it was exasperated, sometimes it was a little irritated and annoyed, or a lot irritated and annoyed. Sometimes it was like I just said something too real for the moment that we were in. It definitely was not always praise, but it always meant that they heard me. And now I've decided to give that phrase a home. This is Ho Petula, a short podcast about long, layered truths. So let's get into it. My full first name is Petula, Petula, Petula. And I have spent a lot of my life being deeply offended by it. I'm not joking. Petula, what were my parents doing? It sounds like a Victorian dessert or part of a flower. And although I am a black woman, I was named after a white woman, a British rock star who was popular in the 1960s named Petula Clark. She had a few hits, and the biggest of which is a song called Downtown. Seriously, Google it. An unconfirmed story in my family claims that there was some kind of oldies rock music station playing in the waiting room of the hospital where I was born, and her song Downtown came on. One time I actually went looking for other Petulas on the internet, and so far I've only found two. Side note, one was a writer for the Washington Post, which I found really interesting because there was a time where I would have loved to have been a writer for the Washington Post. But anyway, clearly the name Petula is rare, unique, memorable even, which is great now when I'm grown and trying to stand out in crowded rooms and on the internet. But when you're 8 years old, Petula just sounds crazy, like some kind of prank. And of course, the kids had jokes. My elementary school was school number 6 in Paterson, New Jersey. That was the scene of the first crime against my self-esteem, the first joke. A couple of boys, I still remember their names, and it's literally been decades ago, called me Petuna Fish. Petuna Fish. And kids don't let go of a nickname, especially one that gets laughs. So in elementary school, I was Petuna Fish. And that did things to my self-esteem, which was already struggling. I was really, really light-skinned and really chubby, and I was clumsy and awkward, and I wore really thick glasses. So being called Petuna Fish was making what was for me a bad situation worse. I remember wishing that my name was something normal like Karen. Now back then it was easier to have that name than it is now. Or Nicole or Kim. All the cute girls were always named Kim back in those days. I didn't want to be special. I wanted to blend in because having a weird name made me feel weird overall. Like I was always offbeat. It's like my name set me up to be weird. Someone named Petula wasn't going to be normal. And that was true even then. I liked books a lot. I had deep thoughts way too early in my life. I was that kid on the playground who wanted to talk about why we played freeze tag instead of running around playing freeze tag, which again doesn't go over well when you're a kid. My name just amplified my strange. Petula sounded like someone who read encyclopedias for fun, which I did, so that was accurate, but it was also tragic. So eventually, I did what many oddly named people do. As an adult, I got a nickname, Tula, just Tula, Tula, and that helped a little. Tula felt lighter, cooler, like easier to explain. Some people even thought it was cute. I thought it was cute. It was easier to say at the coffee shop when they took my order, "It's for Tula, Tula." So I leaned into it because it made things easier for other people. It made me easier to manage. And there's a difference between a nickname that is embraced out of affection and one that exists out of necessity. And although I loved being called Tula, and people said it to me with affection, and they still do to this day, a bigger part of that love for me was because it was easy. But here's the thing, Petula never went away. She was still there, on my mail, in every roll call, and in the voice of any person trying their best to pronounce it for the first time. And eventually, the older I got, the more I realized the name I spent years running away from was doing exactly what names are supposed to do, was telling people who I am. Unusual, specific, not for everybody. And eventually, I stopped wanting to be easy. I wanted to be me. So I named this podcast Oh Petula, not just because that phrase has followed me for decades, but because I finally believe it's a phrase that deserves an answer. And I want to put one more important truth into this mix. I recognize that sometimes making yourself small means making yourself safe. You're in situations and circumstances where being small is how you survive. I get it because I've done it. Those are stories for another day. But please remember that the things you do to survive are intended to be temporary, to be done for a short time, not for a lifetime. So, if you've got a name that's hard to spell or pronounce, or something about you or everything about you just doesn't fit into someone else's expectations, this is your reminder to stop. So if you've shrunk yourself, your voice, your story, your personality to make other people comfortable, this is your reminder to stop. If you've ever edited yourself down to be easier to handle, this is your reminder to stop. I'm saying this to me as much as I'm saying it to you. I'm saying this to us, okay? Because we are living in a time where at some point we are going to have to stand up for someone or something, and we won't be able to do that if we don't know how to stand up for ourselves. Weird names teach you a lot. They teach you that being different requires resilience, that standing out has a cost, but it also has a payoff. And it teaches you that sometimes the very thing that made you feel like an outsider becomes the most powerful part of your identity later. You just have to be willing to stand in it, to answer to it, to say, yes, I'm Petula. So my name is Petula, and I'm growing back into my name one syllable at a time, one podcast episode at a time, because part of what this podcast is about is me growing into me and doing that in a way that might help somebody else grow into themselves, because it's always a good time to figure out everything that you are. So yeah, that's it for now. First podcast episode down, I survived. So if this made you laugh or sigh or remember what they used to call you on the playground, share it with someone else that'll get it. This has been Oh Petula, where the name is odd, the stories are real, and the truth always comes in layers. My name's Petula. What's yours? Please come back next week.